The air in the dojo hung heavy with the sharp scent of polished wood and lingering sweat, the kind that clings to your skin long after the last student has bowed out. Imagine that moment, friends, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry bees, casting long shadows across the tatami mats that have absorbed years of disciplined footsteps. And there, on her knees with a rag in hand, was Aisha Thompson, scrubbing away at a stubborn scuff mark left by some careless heel. She could feel the eyes on her before she heard the voice, that prickling sensation at the back of her neck, like the air thickening just before a storm. Then it came, sharp and unyielding, slicing through the quiet like a blade. "What do you think you're doing here, you filthy gaijin? Your black skin doesn't belong on these sacred floors. Get out before you stain our tradition." Sensei Hiroshi Tanaka's words echoed off the walls, his face twisted in a sneer that made Aisha's stomach churn. He strode toward her, his white gi crisp and immaculate, the black belt around his waist a symbol of authority she had come to resent. Without warning, he shoved her shoulder hard, sending her sprawling across the mat. The impact jarred her bones, the cool surface pressing against her palms as laughter rippled through the small group of lingering students. They pointed, whispers turning into chuckles, phones subtly raised to capture the moment. Aisha's heart pounded, a mix of rage and humiliation bubbling up, but she bit it back, her dark eyes fixed on the floor. This wasn't the first time, but tonight, it felt like the breaking point. Let me take you back a bit, so you can really feel for Aisha, understand why she was there in that ancient dojo tucked away in a quiet corner of Tokyo. Aisha was a woman in her early 30s, tall and strong-shouldered, with deep brown skin that glowed under the right light, and dreadlocks she kept neatly tied back in a bun to avoid drawing extra attention. She moved with a quiet grace, her hands calloused from years of hard work and hidden training, but here in Japan, she often felt like she was shrinking herself to fit into spaces that weren't made for her. Back home in Chicago, Aisha had been a force, teaching self-defense at a local community center, where kids from rough neighborhoods looked up to her as a big sister who could show them how to stand tall. But life had a way of pulling the rug out from under you. After her grandfather's death, the man who raised her after her parents passed in a car accident when she was 10, Aisha found herself adrift. He was the one who instilled in her a love for history, for stories of warriors who defied the odds. "We're more than what they see, child," he'd say, his voice gravelly from years of smoking those cheap cigars he loved. "Our blood carries echoes of kings and fighters." It was in his cluttered attic, sorting through boxes of old memorabilia, that Aisha uncovered the journal that changed everything. Yellowed pages filled with meticulous handwriting, detailing a family tree that stretched back centuries. At its root was Yasuke, the enigmatic African samurai, whose story had been buried in the annals of Japanese history. Yasuke wasn't a fairy tale. He was flesh and blood, a man likely born in the late 1550s in what is now Mozambique, or perhaps Ethiopia, captured and sold into slavery, then transported across seas by Portuguese Jesuit missionaries. Landing in Japan in 1579, his towering height, over 6 feet in a land where men averaged much shorter, and his ebony skin caused a sensation. Crowds gathered to gawk, some trying to rub his skin to see if the color was paint. But Oda Nobunaga, the ambitious daimyo hell-bent on unifying Japan's warring states, saw potential. He had Yasuke bathed publicly to prove his blackness was real, then laughed off the superstitions and made him a retainer. Arming him with a katana, Nobunaga thrust Yasuke into the fray of the Sengoku era's battles. Legends spoke of his immense strength, how he wielded his sword with the power of 10 men, fighting loyally at Nobunaga's side until the warlord's betrayal and suicide at Honnoji Temple in 1582. Yasuke was captured by the traitor Akechi Mitsuhide, but spared, perhaps out of respect or curiosity, and faded into obscurity. Yet whispers persisted, of descendants who carried his blood through hidden lineages, blending African resilience with Japanese discipline. Aisha's grandfather claimed their family descended from one such branch, a child born of Yasuke's brief union before his disappearance, the bloodline weaving through missionaries and traders who eventually crossed oceans to the Americas during the slave trade era. It sounded almost too fantastical, but the journal included faded sketches, a family crest resembling Nobunaga's own, and references to an antique katana passed down as proof. That blade, wrapped in silk and hidden in a false-bottomed trunk, became Aisha's talisman. She spent months researching, poring over academic papers and museum archives online, confirming Yasuke's historicity through Jesuit records and Japanese chronicles like the Shinchokoki. The more she learned, the more a fire ignited within her, a need to bridge the gap between her African-American roots and this distant samurai legacy. If Yasuke could carve a place in a world that saw him as a monster, she thought, maybe I can too. So she quit her job, sold what she could, and boarded a plane to Tokyo, the katana carefully declared as an antique heirloom to customs officials who raised eyebrows but let it through. Landing in Japan was a culture shock wrapped in neon lights and polite bows. Tokyo pulsed with energy, crowded subways where no one made eye contact, vending machines on every corner dispensing hot coffee and mystery snacks, the constant hum of salarymen rushing to offices. Aisha found a cramped apartment in a working-class neighborhood, the kind with thin walls, where you could hear your neighbor's rice cookers beeping at dawn. She practiced her Japanese phrases diligently, bowing deeper than necessary at convenience stores, but the stares followed her everywhere. "Kuroi hito," they'd whisper, black person, as if she were an exhibit. Job hunting was tougher. Her resume screamed foreigner, and interviews often ended with polite rejections. But the Kage Dojo ad for a part-time cleaner caught her eye. Experience with martial arts a plus, it said, though she kept her skills hidden during the interview. The dojo was a relic of old Tokyo, hidden in a narrow alley behind a modern high-rise, its wooden facade weathered by decades of rain and resolve. Inside, the air was thick with the aroma of incense burned during meditations, mixed with the metallic tang of oiled swords. Tatami mats covered the floors, walls lined with scrolls quoting Bushido principles. "The way of the warrior is found in death," one read, its kanji bold and unyielding. Aisha's days fell into a rhythm. She'd arrive in the evenings, after the afternoon classes for kids and before the advanced sessions for adults. Mopping the mats, she'd listen to the rhythmic kiai shouts, those explosive yells that punctuated each strike, feeling the vibrations through the floor. Polishing the bokken, the wooden practice swords, her fingers would trace the grain, imagining Yasuke's hands on something similar. She observed everything. The precise footwork in iaido, the art of drawing the sword swiftly, the clashing shinai in kendo spars, bamboo rattling like thunder. Sensei Hiroshi Tanaka ruled it all with an iron fist wrapped in tradition. In his 40s, with a shaved head and piercing eyes, he moved like a shadow, quick, unforgiving. His lessons were laced with lectures on pure spirit, often veering into subtle nationalism. "Samurai blood runs in our veins," he'd say, ignoring the diverse faces in his class, though most were Japanese. The discrimination crept in slowly, like fog rolling over Tokyo Bay. At first, it was the looks, students averting their eyes when she entered, parents clutching purses a bit tighter. Then the whispers, "Why her? Can't they find someone local?" Sensei Tanaka set the tone. One day, as she wiped down the altar, a small shrine with a photo of the dojo's founder, he snatched the cloth away. "Not like that," he barked. "Your touch lacks respect." Aisha nodded, apologizing in halting Japanese, but inside, it stung. Another time, during a break, she overheard him telling a group of advanced students, "Foreigners dilute our art. They don't have the soul for it." The words landed like punches, especially when paired with glances at her dark skin. Yet, there were glimmers of light that kept her going. Kenji was one. The 12-year-old boy with his oversized gi and perpetual enthusiasm, despite his clumsiness. He reminded Aisha of the kids back home, eager but overlooked. Their first real interaction came one rainy afternoon. Class had ended early due to a storm, thunder rumbling outside like distant war drums. Kenji stayed behind, practicing his basic cuts alone, his shinai swishing awkwardly through the air. Aisha, sweeping nearby, noticed his frustration, sweat beading on his forehead, glasses fogging up. She set down her broom and approached cautiously, demonstrating a proper stance with an imaginary sword. "Like this," she mouthed, exaggerating the motion. Kenji's eyes lit up. He mimicked her, and for the first time his swing had power. "Arigato," he said shyly, bowing. From then on, he'd seek her out, slipping her origami cranes or sharing stories of his dreams to become a kendo champion. "You're strong," he'd sign with gestures, making Aisha smile. In those moments, the dojo felt less hostile, a reminder that humanity could bridge even the widest divides. But the undercurrent of exclusion never fully receded. It built in layers, each incident adding weight to Aisha's resolve. One evening, as she restocked the equipment rack, a group of teenage students blocked her path, giggling. "Move, Obasan," one said, old lady, though she was hardly that, while another mimicked her accent in broken English. Sensei Tanaka watched from across the room but said nothing, his silence a tacit approval. Another time, during a dojo cleaning day, he assigned her the dirtiest tasks, muttering, "Gaijin work for Gaijin messes." Aisha's nights became restless, her tiny apartment a sanctuary where she'd unwrap the katana under the glow of a single bulb. The blade's weight in her hands was comforting, its subtle engravings, faded symbols of loyalty and strength, whispering of Yasuke's trials. She'd practice forms in the confined space, her breaths measured, muscles remembering the drills her grandfather taught. Pivot here, strike true. It was her secret armor, a piece of history that no slur could tarnish. The boiling point arrived on that humid Tuesday, the air sticky with impending rain. The dojo was fuller than usual, parents lingering to watch the advanced class wrap up. Kenji was in the spotlight, or rather, the crosshairs. During a paired drill, he fumbled a block, his shinai clattering to the mat. The older boys snickered, and Sensei Tanaka zeroed in like a hawk. "Again!" he commanded. Kenji tried, but nerves got the better of him. Another drop. "Useless!" Tanaka shouted, his voice reverberating. "Samurai don't shake like cowards. If you can't grasp this, leave and spare us the embarrassment." Kenji's shoulders slumped, tears glistening as he bent to retrieve his weapon, the room thick with uncomfortable silence punctuated by whispers. Aisha, mopping in the corner, felt a surge of protectiveness. She set her tools aside and stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "He's learning. Give him time." She knelt beside Kenji, adjusting his grip gently, whispering, "Breathe. You've got this." The boy nodded, managing a shaky smile. Tanaka's reaction was explosive. He whirled, his face reddening. "You!" he spat, the word dripping with contempt. The subtle biases ignited, his gaze sweeping her from head to toe, lingering on her dreadlocks, her skin. "A black cleaner daring to teach? You know nothing of our ways, Gaijin." The insults escalated, explicit and raw. "Your dark hands soil everything, our mats, our air, our tradition." Whispers turned to open mockery, students pointing. "Look at her thinking she's one of us." "Yeah, go back to Africa." Laughter swelled, phones flashing as they recorded. Aisha rose, her pulse thundering, but she held her ground. "Respect isn't earned by color," she said evenly. Tanaka's laugh was cruel, echoing. "Respect? For filth like you?" He closed the distance, the tension snapping. In a surge of aggression, he grabbed her mop and hurled water from the bucket at her feet, splashing her clothes. Then, the shove, hard, deliberate, sending her stumbling back. "See? Weak and out of place. Black like you has no claim to samurai. Crawl away." The humiliation crested, the crowd's derision a roaring wave, fingers jabbing, voices overlapping in scorn. Aisha's vision blurred with unshed tears, fear clashing with fury, fear of repercussions, of being truly alone here. But dignity anchored her. She wiped her face, standing tall. Thoughts of Yasuke flooded in, his endurance, his blade. "You question my worth?" she challenged, voice cutting through. "Then face me. A duel tomorrow, samurai rules." Tanaka smirked, eyeing the eager crowd. "Accepted, but lose and you're gone forever." Aisha nodded, hand grazing her hidden katana's bag. The dojo buzzed, but in her mind, resolve crystallized. Yasuke's legacy would speak tomorrow, unresolved yet unyielding. As Aisha stepped out of the dojo into the humid Tokyo night, the weight of the challenge settled over her like a heavy fog rolling in from the Sumida River. The alley was alive with the distant hum of traffic and the sizzle of street food vendors flipping takoyaki under glowing lanterns. But her mind was a whirlwind, replaying Tanaka's shove, the splash of water, the sting of laughter. She clutched her bag tighter, feeling the outline of the hidden katana through the fabric, a silent companion that grounded her amid the chaos. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself, her breath visible in the cooling air. The challenge had spilled out of her in a moment of defiance, but now, walking the neon-lit streets toward her apartment, doubt crept in. Fear twisted in her gut. What if she lost? What if this exposed her secrets too soon? Yet, beneath it, resilience flickered like a candle in the wind. Yasuke's story had taught her that true warriors faced the storm head-on. The walk home felt longer than usual, the city's pulse a stark contrast to her inner turmoil. Tokyo at night was a symphony of sounds, the rhythmic clack of salarymen's shoes on pavement, the electronic jingles from pachinko parlors spilling colorful lights onto the sidewalks, the occasional bark of a street hawker selling grilled yakitori. Aisha wove through crowds of office workers loosening their ties after long hours, their faces illuminated by smartphone screens. She envied their anonymity. As a tall black woman with dreadlocks, she stood out like a beacon, drawing curious glances that sometimes bordered on stares. One man bumped her shoulder without apology, muttering something under his breath that sounded like gaijin. It was a small slight, but it piled onto the evening's wounds, making her shoulders tense. "Keep moving," she told herself, drawing on the resilience her grandfather had instilled. He used to say, "The world will try to bend you, but roots like ours run deep, unbreakable." Her apartment was a modest refuge on the 5th floor of a nondescript building in Asakusa, the kind of place where the elevator groaned like an old man and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing over late-night TV. She fumbled with her keys, the door creaking open to reveal a space barely larger than a closet. A single futon rolled out on tatami flooring, a tiny kitchenette with a hot plate, and a window overlooking the glittering skyline where the Tokyo skytree pierced the night like a modern-day sword. The air smelled faintly of instant ramen and the jasmine incense she burned to remind herself of home, a scent that transported her back to Chicago's bustling kitchens where her grandfather would brew strong tea and spin tales. Aisha kicked off her shoes, sinking onto the futon with a sigh. Her clothes were still damp from the spilled water, clinging uncomfortably to her skin, a tangible reminder of the humiliation. She peeled them off, changing into loose sweats, her muscles aching from the fall. In the quiet, anger bubbled up, hot and unfiltered. "Who does he think he is?" she muttered, pacing the small room. Tanaka's words echoed. "Black like you has no claim." It cut deep, stirring memories of Chicago streets where similar slurs had followed her like shadows, kids at school calling her names, job interviews where her resume was overlooked despite qualifications. But here in Japan, it felt amplified. A foreigner in a land that prized conformity and subtle hierarchies. To steady herself, Aisha reached under the futon for her bag, carefully unwrapping the katana. The blade gleamed under the dim bulb, its hilt wrapped in aged silk, etched with faint symbols that her grandfather swore were from Nobunaga's era, perhaps a stylized mon, or crest, resembling the Paulonia flower associated with the Oda clan. Holding it, she felt a connection, a thread across centuries, from Africa's vast savannas to Japan's misty mountains. Yasuke's tale wasn't just history. It was her anchor, a narrative of triumph over prejudice that mirrored her own struggles. She recalled the journal's details, pieced together from fragmented records. Born in Africa, likely in the 1550s amid the turmoil of tribal conflicts and early European incursions, Yasuke was captured young, sold into slavery, and endured the horrors of the Middle Passage's eastern equivalent, chained on Portuguese ships navigating treacherous Indian Ocean routes. In 1579, he arrived in Kyoto with the Jesuit missionary Alessandro Valignano, his towering frame, over 6 feet tall in a society where average height was much lower, and ebony skin causing riots in the streets. Historical accounts from the time, like those in the Jesuit letters and the Japanese chronicle Shinchokoki, described crowds mobbing him, some tearing at his clothes to touch his skin, convinced he was a mythical being or demon. But Oda Nobunaga, the ruthless daimyo hell-bent on unifying Japan's warring states during the bloody Sengoku era, saw potential beyond the spectacle. Nobunaga, known for his innovative tactics and disregard for tradition, demanded to see this black giant at his castle. He ordered Yasuke scrubbed in a bath to prove his color wasn't ink or dirt, then burst into laughter, declaring him extraordinary and free of superstition's chains. He took Yasuke into his service, granting him a stipend equivalent to a mid-level samurai, a residence in a Zuchi castle, and, crucially, a katana, the mark of a warrior elite. Yasuke trained rigorously, adapting his raw strength to the precise arts of kenjutsu and strategy. Legends spoke of his immense power, how he wielded his sword with the force of 10 men, fighting in battles like the campaign against the Takeda clan at Nagashino or the subjugation of Echizen province. He became Nobunaga's trusted retainer, carrying his lord's spear in processions and even his head in symbolic rituals during campaigns. But loyalty came at a cost. When Akechi Mitsuhide betrayed Nobunaga at Honnoji Temple in 1582, forcing the warlord to commit seppuku amid flames, Yasuke defended him to the end, slaying several attackers before being overwhelmed. Captured, he was derided as a beast by Akechi but spared execution, perhaps due to his foreign status or Akechi's curiosity, and vanished into obscurity. Some speculate he returned to the Jesuits or lived quietly in Japan. Others whisper of descendants who carried his blood through hidden lineages, blending African resilience with Japanese discipline amid the Tokugawa shogunate's isolation. Aisha's family claimed descent through a hidden child Yasuke fathered before his disappearance, perhaps with a concubine or local woman during his service, the bloodline preserved through whispers and migrations across Asia and eventually to the Americas via trade routes and the slave diaspora. Whether fully verifiable or embroidered by generations of oral history, it gave her purpose, a narrative that transformed her from outsider to inheritor. She stood, assuming a basic Iaido stance in the cramped space, drawing the blade slowly, the whisper of steel on scabbard like a sigh from the past, then slashing with controlled power that made the air hum. Her breaths came even, muscles remembering the forms her grandfather drilled into her on Chicago's rooftops, where the wind whipped off Lake Michigan and city lights mimicked stars. "Pivot here, strike true, feel the ancestors' flow," he'd instruct, his arthritic hands guiding hers. It was her secret armor, a piece of history that no slur could tarnish. But as she sheathed the katana, a wave of isolation hit harder than before. Who could she turn to here? No family, no friends beyond Kenji's fleeting smiles. She scrolled through her phone, staring at old photos of her grandfather, his wrinkled face beaming during her first self-defense demo. "Wish you were here," she thought, tears pricking her eyes. Sleep came fitfully, dreams haunted by Tanaka's sneer, the dojo's mocking echoes, and visions of Yasuke battling shadows. The next morning dawned crisp, the sun filtering through smoggy skies as Aisha made her way back to the dojo for her shift. The alley felt narrower, the wooden sign creaking ominously in the breeze as if the building itself anticipated the storm. She pushed open the door, the familiar scent of incense and sweat greeting her like an unwelcome embrace, now laced with the faint metallic edge of tension. Students were already gathering for the early class, their GI rustling as they stretched on the mats, the soft thump of feet echoing like distant drums. But the atmosphere had shifted palpably. Subtle looks darted her way, eyes narrowing behind polite masks that barely concealed judgment. One girl whispered to another, "That's the one who challenged Sensei. Crazy guy Jin. Thinks she can play samurai." The words slithered through the air, making Aisha's skin prickle. She ignored it, grabbing her mop and starting on the mats, her movements mechanical. Her heart raced, but she focused on the rhythm. Dip, swipe, rinse. Each stroke a small act of defiance. Resilience meant enduring the small cuts before the big battle, turning their disdain into fuel. It didn't take long for the escalation to begin. Sensei Tanaka arrived mid-morning, his footsteps heavy on the wood, each one resounding like a challenge. He spotted her immediately, his face hardening into a mask of controlled fury. "You!" he called across the room, voice laced with disdain that drew all eyes. The class paused, turning to watch as if this were part of the lesson. He approached, blocking her path to the supply closet with his broad frame, his guy whispering against the air. "After last night's embarrassment, you think you can just waltz in here like nothing happened?" His words were verbal barbs, sharp and public, designed to pierce. "A black outsider like you, do you even know what a duel means? It's not for pretenders who splash around like fools." Snickers rippled from the students, fingers pointing subtly, their faces alight with schadenfreude. Aisha met his gaze, her voice steady despite the knot in her throat. "I know honor when I see it, or don't." But inside, fear gnawed. What if he canceled the challenge, humiliated her further by firing her on the spot? Tanaka's response was a shove, not hard enough to bruise, but enough to make her step back abruptly, her bucket clattering loudly against the rack. The sound amplified the moment, drawing more stares. "Stay out of the training area," he snarled, manhandling her arm to push her toward the door, his grip firm and demeaning. "Your kind dirties the space. Your presence alone disrupts the harmony." The mockery swelled. "Yeah, go clean somewhere else," a boy called from the mats, others laughing in a chorus that echoed off the scroll-covered walls. Parents in the viewing area exchanged glances but stayed silent, their inaction a deeper wound, like a collective shrug at her expense. Aisha's cheeks burned, anger flaring hot in her chest, visions of Yasuke's battles flashing, how he'd faced crowds of gawkers with unyielding poise. "This is my job," she protested quietly, pulling her arm free, but he waved her off, turning to the class with a smirk that invited their complicity. "See? No discipline, no respect. That's why outsiders fail." She retreated to the back room, hands trembling as she gripped the mop handle like a sword. Dignity urged her to walk out forever, but resilience whispered to stay. Prove them wrong tomorrow. Let their underestimation be their downfall. The afternoon brought more hostility, the dojo filling with advanced students prepping for evening spars, their chatter a low buzz like bees in a hive. Aisha emerged to polish the Bakken rack, her movements deliberate and focused, the wood smooth under her cloth. Whispers followed her like shadows lengthening in the slanting light from the windows. "Bet she backs out of the duel. Black skin and a G? Ridiculous. She'll look like a joke." The comments stung, each one a reminder of her isolation. Then came the unfair accusation, a calculated strike. Tanaka, overseeing a drill where Shinai clashed with rhythmic thwacks, noticed a smudge on one of the practice swords, a minor imperfection that could have come from anywhere. "Who did this?" he bellowed, holding it up like evidence in a trial. His eyes locked on Aisha, narrowing with intent. "You! Your careless hands, always ruining things with your sloppy work." It was a blatant lie. She'd polished them meticulously that morning, the scent of oil still fresh on her fingers, but he advanced, scornful comments flying faster now. "Gaijin like you don't respect our tools. Your dark fingers leave marks everywhere, smudges that no amount of scrubbing can erase." The class erupted in mockery, pointing openly now, laughter echoing off the walls like a wave crashing. "Clean it again, monkey," one teen jeered, the racial slur hitting like a physical punch, drawing gasps from a few but chuckles from others. Aisha's inner turmoil peaked. Anger surged through her veins, hot and primal, visions of swinging the katana flashing in her mind's eye, but fear held her back. Escalate now, and she'd lose her job, her access to this world she sought to claim. "I didn't do that," she started, her voice firm but edged with tremor, but Tanaka cut her off with a symbolic slap, a light backhand to her shoulder, more demeaning than painful, delivered right in front of the crowd to assert dominance. "Know your place," he hissed, his breath hot on her face. The humiliation was total. Whispers turned to outright taunts, phones capturing the scene with flashes that blinded her momentarily. She bit her lip, tasting the metallic tang of blood, dignity her only shield as she knelt to repolish the sword, her hands steady despite the rage boiling inside. As she worked, the dojo's rhythm resumed, shinai clashing, ki shouts piercing the air, but the energy felt tainted, charged with her degradation. In that low moment, Kenji slipped over during a water break, his small hand offering a tissue discreetly. "Don't listen to them," he whispered, his eyes wide with empathy and a hint of fear for her. "You're better than that." It was a brief flicker of solidarity, a crack of light in the oppressive darkness, reminding her that not all hearts were closed. She managed a small smile, ruffling his hair gently. "Thanks, kid. Keep practicing. You'll show them too." The exchange was quick, but it bolstered her resilience, a reminder that change often started with the young, the open-minded. But the evening ratcheted the tension higher, the dojo buzzing with anticipation for a special review session Tanaka announced via a hastily posted flyer, clearly a ploy to rally support against her and build hype for the duel. Parents crowded the benches, their conversations a murmur of speculation, while students geared up with extra vigor, shinai whipping through the air. Aisha tried to finish her tasks, wiping down the altar with careful strokes, the incense smoke curling like ghosts around her. But hostility thickened the air like smoke from a battlefield, pervasive and choking. Tanaka organized a mock duel demo, pairing students in exaggerated spars, his commentary laced with jabs at her expense. "Watch this precision," he'd say, glancing her way. "Not like some who stumble and splash. Foreign blood can't grasp Bushido's essence." Scornful comments flew from the crowd. "Look at her skin, doesn't blend with our traditions." "She'll run scared tomorrow." Then, the direct attack escalated further. As she passed with a tray of cleaning supplies, navigating the crowded edges, a group of older students, egged on by Tanaka's nods, blocked her path deliberately. "Hand over your bag," Tanaka demanded, stepping in with authority, accusing her of hiding tricks or stolen items. His voice boomed, drawing all attention. "We can't trust outsiders. Your type always schemes." He grabbed the strap roughly, yanking it so her belongings spilled across the mat, her water bottle rolling, keys jingling, a notebook fluttering open to reveal sketches of samurai forms. The crowd mocked mercilessly. What she got in there? Jungle weapons or voodoo charms? Laughter roared, fingers jabbing the air like accusatory blades, phones recording every humiliating second. Aisha's fear spiked. What if they rummaged deeper and found the katana? She snatched the bag back, resilience stealing her voice amid the chaos. "Enough! This ends tomorrow." In her turmoil, she slipped out to the alley for air, the city lights blurring through angry tears that she wiped away fiercely. The cool breeze carried scents of nearby ramen shops, grounding her as she leaned against the wall. There, under the shadow of a humming vending machine, she practiced subtly, drawing an imaginary blade, forms flowing like water over stones, her breaths syncing with the distant train rumbles. Unbeknownst to her, Mrs. Sato, the elderly dojo owner who rarely interfered in daily affairs, watched from a side window, her frail form silhouetted against the interior light. Sato's eyes widened at the precision. The ancient Iaido draws reminiscent of lost styles from the Sengoku era, fluid and powerful. That stance. It's like the old chronicles, she murmured to herself, a clue dawning in her mind. Sato had studied history extensively, poring over texts about Yasuke's legendary techniques passed in whispers through underground lineages. She recognized the echo. The way Aisha's imaginary cuts mirrored descriptions of Yasuke's battlefield prowess, adapting brute strength to elegant precision. But Sato said nothing, retreating inside with a thoughtful frown, a mysterious hint of potential alliance brewing, though Aisha remained unaware. As night deepened, Aisha returned, the dojo's energy electric with malicious glee. Laughter spilled from within, Tanaka's voice booming jests at her expense to a rapt audience. She stood at the threshold, hand on her bag, whispering fiercely to the katana within, "Yasuke will prove it." The words carried on the wind, and inside a sudden silence fell, the crowd freezing as if sensing the storm about to break. Tanaka's smirk faltered for the first time, an imminent confrontation hanging like a drawn blade, the air thick with unspoken shock and the promise of revelation. The morning of the duel broke over Tokyo like a hesitant dawn, the sky a pale gray streaked with the first hints of gold, as if the city itself held its breath for what was to come. Aisha rose early in her apartment, the futon's thin padding doing little to ease the knots in her back from a night of restless turning. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of rain from the night before, mingling with the jasmine incense she'd lit as a quiet ritual to center herself. She stood at the window for a moment, watching the early risers below, delivery bikes zipping through narrow streets, an old woman sweeping her stoop with methodical strokes. The Tokyo skytree loomed in the distance, a modern sentinel against the horizon, reminding her of how far she'd come from Chicago's skyline. Today, she thought, her heart a steady drumbeat of resolve mixed with the flutter of nerves that made her hands tremble slightly as she prepared tea. Yasuke had faced crowds that saw him as a monster, enduring baths to prove his humanity, battling in wars that weren't his own. She could face this one that saw her as an intruder, a stain on their tradition. Dressing in simple black pants and a fitted shirt, practical, unassuming, allowing free movement, she wrapped the katana carefully in silk and slipped it into her bag. The weight was comforting, a tangible link to her ancestor. She ate a light breakfast of rice and miso, forcing it down despite the knot in her stomach, then headed out. The walk to the dojo felt charged, the streets awakening with the clatter of shop shutters rising and the aroma of fresh miso soup wafting from corner eateries. Pedestrians hurried by, oblivious to the battle brewing in her mind, but Aisha felt every step as a march toward reclamation. Her mind replayed the previous day's humiliations, the shoves, the slurs, the laughter that still echoed in her ears like a bad dream. Fear whispered doubts. What if the katana's reveal fell flat? What if they dismissed her story as fantasy? But resilience pushed back, fueled by memories of her grandfather's voice. Our blood is proof enough. By the time she reached the alley, her stride was firm, her chin lifted despite the butterflies in her stomach. The Cage Dojo was already humming with unusual energy when she arrived, far earlier than her shift. The alley outside was dotted with a few early arrivals, parents chatting in low tones about the crazy challenge, students stretching against the walls with excited whispers. Inside, the space felt transformed. Mats freshly swept. By someone else, she noted with a wry twist in her gut. Bakken racks gleaming under the lights, and the altar's incense burning stronger, its smoky tendrils curling toward the ceiling like prayers for fairness. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a stark glow that made shadows dance along the scrolls of Bushido wisdom. Honor, courage, benevolence. Words that now felt ironic in light of the hostility she'd faced. But the crowd was the real change. Dozens packed in, far more than a typical class, their bodies pressing close, the air thick with the scent of fresh ghee cotton and underlying tension. Whispers hushed as Aisha entered, eyes tracking her every move like hawks. Some faces held curiosity, others skepticism, a few outright hostility with crossed arms and narrowed gazes. Kenji spotted her from the front row, waving shyly, his small frame dwarfed by the adults around him, his glasses slipping down his nose as he grinned. It warmed her, a small anchor in the sea of judgment. Mrs. Sato sat quietly in the corner, her wrinkled hands folded in her lap, her expression unreadable. A silent observer amid the buzz that grew as more people filed in, the room filling with the low murmur of speculation. Sensei Tanaka was there, of course, warming up in the center of the mat with deliberate flair. His GI was pristine, starched to perfection, his movements sharp and deliberate, high cuts with a Bakken that whistled through the air, each one a display of confidence meant to intimidate. He glanced her way as she set her bag down, his sneer barely concealed behind a mask of composure. "So you showed," he called across the room, voice carrying to draw attention and stir the pot. "Thought you'd run back to your jungle." The words sparked murmurs, a ripple of laughter from his loyal students who nodded in agreement, their faces alight with anticipation of her downfall. Aisha felt the sting, but met his eyes evenly, her voice calm despite the racing pulse. "I'm here for honor," she replied simply, echoing the dojo's own teachings that hung on the walls. Tanaka laughed, a harsh sound that filled the room like gravel underfoot. "Honor? From a gaijin like you? This will be quick, a lesson in humility for all to see." The crowd shifted, some chuckling, others watching with folded arms. The setup unfolded with a formality that heightened the tension, the crowd settling into a semicircle around the mat, their breaths collective in the confined space. Mrs. Sato stepped forward unexpectedly, her voice steady and authoritative as she announced she'd referee to ensure fairness. "We use Bakken for safety. No live blades, no strikes to the head or vital areas. First to yield or be disarmed loses," she said, her eyes flicking between them with a weight that suggested she knew more than she let on from her observation the night before. The stakes were restated for the audience. If Tanaka won, Aisha left the dojo forever. Her job and her quest ended in shame. If she triumphed, he'd acknowledge her right to the art, perhaps even her place in it as more than a cleaner. The crowd murmured approval, the air thick with anticipation, the scent of sweat already mingling with incense as bodies shifted in excitement. Aisha and Tanaka faced off on the mat, Bakken in hand, hers borrowed from the rack, feeling foreign and light compared to her heirloom's balanced heft. They bowed, the gesture stiff with underlying venom, the mat cool under her bare feet, grounding her. The duel began with a sharp kiai from Tanaka, his Bakken slicing forward in an aggressive overhead strike that forced Aisha to parry immediately. The clash of wood echoed like thunder in the hushed room, vibrating through her arms and into her core. He pressed the attack, a flurry of cuts, left, right, low, each one backed by years of rigid training, his face contorted with focus and disdain. The crowd leaned in, murmurs rising. "End it quick, Sensei! Show her what real samurai looks like!" Aisha dodged, her footwork light and adaptive, drawing on the hybrid style her grandfather taught, blending the precise Japanese forms with the raw, fluid power of African warrior traditions she'd researched in old texts and family stories. But Tanaka was relentless, his strikes symbolic attacks on her presence. "You fight like a beast, wild, no control." He shoved her Bakken aside roughly during a lock, nearly unbalancing her, the physical aggression and echo of last night's shove in front of the same eyes now watching intently. Pain shot through her shoulder, a sharp twinge that made her gasp, but she held her ground, circling him with measured steps that betrayed her training. Fear flickered in her mind. His skill was real, honed in this very space where he ruled unchallenged, his every move backed by the crowd's energy. Yet resilience surged. She countered with a swift riposte, her Bakken grazing his guard, drawing a surprised grunt from him and a hush from the audience. The exchanges intensified, the mat thumping under their feet like a heartbeat accelerating, sweat beading on brows and soaking into clothing. Tanaka's insults flew amid the clashes, explicit and cutting to shock the viewers and heighten his dominance. "Your black skin mocks our legacy. Yield now, before I break you like the outsider you are." The crowd mocked in turn, pointing and whispering loudly, "She's tiring already. Look at her shake. Gaijin can't handle it." A symbolic humiliation came when he fainted high and swept low, tripping her slightly so she stumbled back, her Bakken skittering across the mat for a moment. Laughter erupted from the audience, phones flashing to capture the Gaijin's fall, the sound a cacophony that burned in her ears like fire. Aisha dove for it, rolling gracefully to retrieve it, but the moment stung. Total exposure in front of them all, her dreadlocks coming loose in the motion, sweat stinging her eyes and mixing with the salt of frustration. Inner turmoil raged. Anger at the jeers that echoed the previous day's taunts, fear of defeat stripping her purpose, leaving her adrift in this foreign land with nothing but a ticket home. But dignity held firm. She rose, Bakken in hand, eyes locked on his with a fire that made a few in the crowd shift uncomfortably, sensing the tide might turn. "Not yet," she thought, channeling Yasuke's endurance through crowds that rubbed his skin to test if it was real, through battles where he was the odd one out, fighting for a lord who saw his worth. As the duel wore on, minutes stretching like hours in the heated room where the air grew thick with exertion, Aisha's breaths steadied, her body adapting to his patterns like water flowing around rocks. Tanaka's aggression betrayed openings, telegraphed swings from overconfidence, his breaths coming heavier now, sweat darkening his gi. She exploited one, her Bakken whipping in a low arc that forced him back a step, the wood cracking loudly against his. The crowd hushed slightly, surprise flickering on faces. Whispers of, "How did she do that?" "She's better than I thought." Tanaka's eyes narrowed, his next attack wilder, aiming to end it with a powerful downward cut that could have bruised ribs if it landed, the whoosh of air close to her ear as she sidestepped at the last second. The near miss sent a ripple through the audience, some gasping. Aisha's voice cut through the tension like a blade drawn from its sheath. "Enough hiding who I am." She dropped the Bakken with a clatter that reverberated, reaching into her bag amid collective gasps from the crowd, their murmurs rising to a crescendo. Out came the katana, real steel, its scabbard ancient and worn with the patina of centuries, the draw a slow, deliberate motion that filled the room with the soft sing of metal on metal, a sound that seemed to echo from history itself. The blade gleamed under the lights, like captured fire, its edge dulled by time, but its presence commanding, the hilt's etchings catching eyes. The room froze, the air thick with shock, the incense smoke seeming to pause in its curl as if time itself hesitated. Tanaka's Bakken lowered slightly, his face paling, eyes wide with disbelief. "What is this trickery?" he demanded, but his voice lacked its earlier bite, cracking slightly under the weight of the moment. Aisha held the katana with reverence, its weight a comfort in her calloused hands, and spoke, her voice steady and resonant, carrying to every corner of the silent dojo. "This belonged to Yasuke, my ancestor." The name hung in the air, a revelation that rippled through the crowd like a wave crashing against rocks, murmurs building. "Yasuke? The African samurai from the old tales? Is that possible? I've heard stories." Tanaka scoffed, gripping his Bakken tighter, but doubt crept into his eyes like shadows at dusk. Lies. A gaijin fantasy to save face from defeat. Aisha shook her head slowly, the katana steady in her grip as she began to weave the tale, her words painting pictures in the minds of the listeners. No fantasy. Yasuke came to Japan in 1579, a man from Africa, likely Mozambique or Ethiopia, captured young in the turmoil of his homeland, sold into slavery, and brought across treacherous oceans by Portuguese Jesuit missionaries as a servant to Alessandro Valignano. His height over 6 feet, his ebony skin caused riots in Kyoto. People mobbed him, tearing at his clothes to touch what they thought was painted blackness, convinced he was a mythical being or demon from foreign lands. She paused, letting the story sink in, the crowd leaning forward now, phones lowered as curiosity overtook mockery, some nodding as fragments of history clicked into place from school lessons or books. Oda Nobunaga, the ambitious daimyo conquering swaths of Japan during the bloody Sengoku era, heard of this black giant and summoned him to his castle in Azuchi. He ordered Yasuke bathed publicly to prove his color was real, not ink or dirt, then burst into laughter, declaring him extraordinary and free of the superstitions that plagued others. Nobunaga freed him from servitude, granted him a stipend equivalent to a mid-level samurai, a residence in the castle, and, crucially, a katana, the mark of a warrior elite. Yasuke trained rigorously, adapting his raw strength to the precise arts of kenjutsu and strategy, blending his African roots with Bushido's discipline. Legends spoke of his immense power, how he wielded his sword with the force of 10 men, fighting in battles like the campaign against the Takeda clan at Nagashino or the subjugation of Ekizen province. He became Nobunaga's trusted retainer, carrying his lord's spear in processions and even his head in symbolic rituals during campaigns. But loyalty came at a cost. When Akechi Mitsuhide betrayed Nobunaga at Honnoji Temple in 1582, forcing the warlord to commit seppuku amid the flames of his own castle, Yasuke defended him to the end, slaying several attackers before being overwhelmed. Captured, he was derided as a beast by Akechi but spared execution, perhaps due to his foreign status or Akechi's curiosity, and vanished into obscurity. Some speculate he returned to the Jesuits or lived quietly in Japan. Others whisper of descendants who carried his blood through hidden lineages, blending African resilience with Japanese discipline amid the Tokugawa shogunate's isolation. The dojo was electric with the twist, the revelation hanging heavy as the crowd processed it. Mrs. Sato's face lit with recognition. She'd suspected from Aisha's alley practice the night before, the forms matching chronicles she'd pored over in her youth. The Shinchokoki speaks of him, Sato murmured aloud, her voice carrying. Jesuit letters confirm his existence and deeds. Tanaka's bokken trembled in his hand, his face a mask of conflict, pride warring with the dawning truth. If true. But how do you claim this? He asked, voice hoarse. Aisha nodded, lowering the katana slightly but holding it as proof. My family carried the story, and this blade, through generations. Etched with Oda's symbols, passed in secret from Yasuke's hidden child, through migrations across Asia and to America via trade routes and the slave diaspora. Whether fully verifiable or embroidered by time, it's my legacy, a bridge between worlds. The crowd shifted, some nodding as whispers of Yasuke's story spread, his arrival causing riots, Nobunaga's fascination turning to trust, his battles against clans like Takeda where his strength turned tides. The revelation resolved the injustices in a rush. Aisha wasn't an intruder, she was heir to their legacy, her presence a bridge to a forgotten chapter of their own history. Resuming the duel with Bokken for safety, but the dynamic had flipped irrevocably. Aisha's movements now channeled Yasuke's described prowess, powerful yet precise, adapting brute force to elegant precision, her strikes infused with the story's weight. Tanaka attacked half-heartedly, his form crumbling under the truth's burden, his breaths ragged. She disarmed him with a fluid twist, her bokken pinning his to the mat without a scratch, forcing him to yield as he dropped to one knee. He staggered back, chest heaving, the crowd silent in stunned respect. Consequences dawned swiftly. Tanaka's face crumpled, arrogance cracking like brittle wood under pressure. He dropped to his knees fully, the mat creaking under him, head bowed in defeat. "I was wrong," he admitted, voice breaking with emotion. "Blinded by pride and ignorance, I dishonored Bushido's true spirit. Your strength, your ancestors, shames me. Forgive my blindness. I see now." Tears glistened as he pressed his forehead to the mat in a deep bow, the gesture raw and genuine, a public reckoning. The resolution cascaded like a wave breaking over the room. Applause started tentatively from Kenji, then swelled as others joined, the crowd's mockery transforming to admiration and awe. Mrs. Sato approached, smiling faintly with approval that lit her aged features. "I've studied the chronicles. Yasuke's tale is real, a part of our history often overlooked. Your forms confirmed it last night in the alley. The dojo welcomes you not as cleaner, but instructor. Teach us this lost legacy. Bridge the past to our present." Cheers erupted, the air alive with claps and nods, the energy shifting from tension to celebration. Kenji rushed forward, hugging her legs tightly. "You're a real samurai like in the stories. Can I learn from you?" Parents followed, some ashamed as they offered handshakes and quiet apologies. "We saw only difference. Forgive us for our narrow views." One student, the jeerer from yesterday, bowed low with red cheeks. "I mocked what I didn't understand. Show me the way." Aisha reclaimed her dignity fully, standing tall amid the recognition, justice not through vengeance but through truth's gentle, undeniable force. Tanaka rose, humbled but earnest, clasping her hand firmly. "I'll learn from you, start anew, with open eyes. This dojo will honor all warriors regardless of origin." In the aftermath, as the crowd dispersed with excited chatter about Yasuke's exploits, the dojo transformed subtly. Space was cleared on the walls for new scrolls, Aisha promising to share sketches and journal excerpts in future classes to illustrate his journey. Students lingered, asking questions about Yasuke's battles, his adaptation to Bushido, how his African roots blended with Japanese ways to create something unique. Equality bloomed through shared curiosity, respect replacing division as former adversaries became allies in learning. Aisha felt hope settle deep, a new chapter where her resilience had forged unity, turning personal pain into communal growth. Heartfelt solidarity wrapped the room. Even former mockers expressed regret in quiet conversations, one parent admitting to Aisha, "My child will learn better from this. Thank you for opening our eyes." The moral shone through the outcome, unspoken but clear. Resilience turned prejudice to understanding. Respect transcended barriers of skin and origin. Equality thrived in honoring shared human stories that connect us all. As the sun set outside, casting warm hues through the windows that painted the mats in gold like a blessing, Aisha sheathed the katana, its weight a promise kept, a legacy alive. And in that ancient dojo, a black woman reminded everyone that true strength lies in embracing our shared histories, turning echoes of the past into bridges for a more inclusive future. What do you think, friends? Could you uncover your own hidden strength like Aisha? Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts, like if this story moved you, and subscribe for more tales of courage and connection. Until next time, keep seeking your legacy with heart.